Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another in the series of Science for Today Forum, hosted by the Faculty of Science and Technology at the University of the West Indies. My name is Ian Thompson, and I will be the moderator for today's discussion. Today's topic is the science behind front of package labeling, balancing industry, trade, and health perspectives. And for this, we have assembled an expert panel to present the position and perspectives of the main stakeholders in this discussion. My role is to moderate this discussion objectively and fairly while attempting to interrogate the information presented by our presenters. However, before we begin, I'd like to share some information as it relates to, conditions precedent to this discussion. And what are those? While we queue up those slides, I'll commence my opening remarks. Without a doubt, this is one of the most important public health issues facing us in Jamaica, and indeed, regionally and globally. The certain onset of non-communicable diseases, Ncds, or lifestyle diseases associated with our diets. This issue is already having a profound effect on all of us, even if we remain unaware of its slow march through our bodies, insidious as it is. But many of us are already familiar with the signs and symptoms. This issue threatens to shorten our productive lives, upend the gains made through the advances in science and medicine and healthcare. With a relatively young population as ours in Jamaica, we cannot afford to ignore this issue. Our ambitions of economic prosperity for all and growth for the society depends on a healthy population. Indeed, our health is our wealth. So we must take meaningful action to reverse a worrying trend so as to preserve a bright future for our children and future generations. Now, the current educational and marketing campaign waged by the Heart Foundation of Jamaica is worthy of note. Some may even characterize it as being unprecedented and even aggressive. But we understand that behavior change is the objective. How do we influence consumers, that is, all of us, to change entrenched habits? After all, our food choices in Jamaica are steeped in our unique heritage. So they are an emotional and cultural habit. And as with all things related to food, it is heavily influenced by the sensory delight that we experience in the taste and the aroma and flavor. Indeed, it is the gustatory experiences which makes our food highly sought after. As we search for mutually acceptable solution to for all the stakeholders, we must try our best to work cooperatively. I will end with the following questions, which we hope our panelists will be able to unpack in our discourse on front of package labeling. Is front of package labeling the silver bullet? Is it the most significant factor leading to our declining health status? And what about our quick service restaurants? You know them. Will they also be required to begin implementing similar declarations? But there may be the perception that manufacturers are against front of package labeling. Is this true? I would argue that it's an enlightened self-interest. It is through enlightened self-interest for them to ensure that consumers remain healthy so that they can continue to support their business. Despite the need to support a regional standard, has the regulatory agency considered other approaches to a mandatory standard at this time? And how does the government or the regulatory agency intend to level the playing field for local manufacturers, given that the high proportion of imported food which comprise our food supply continues unabated? These questions and others, I'm sure our panelists will be more than willing to address. Now, what I will do is introduce the panelists, starting from our own food chemist here at the University of the West Indies. To begin, I'd like to welcome my colleague and friend, Dr. Patrice Pearce, who is originally from Portland. Dr. Pearce graduated from the University of the West Indies, Mona, with an undergraduate degree in chemistry and management studies, followed by a PhD in chemistry on the biotransformation of steroids using fungi in 2009. But she did not end there. In 2013, she sojourned to the Cornell University, where she pursued a Master of Professional Studies in Food Technology, after which she returned to Jamaica. She's currently a lecturer in the Department of Chemistry. And Dr. Pearce's interest in this topic is significant because she's intimately concerned about the impact that nutrition has on the health of her young children. I'd also like to welcome Ms. Philippa O'Connor, who has a BSc in dietetics and nutrition and is a senior standards officer at the Bureau of Standards, where she has acquired over 8 years of experience in standard development, conformity assessment, technical regulations. She's eminently qualified and has been leading the BSJ's charge and managing the national discussion regarding nutrition and front of package labeling. So we welcome you, Ms. O'Connor. I'd also like to welcome Mrs. Barbara McGaw from the Heart Foundation of Jamaica, whose academic background is primarily in science and incidentally an alumna of the University of the West Indies, where she obtained both her bachelor's and master's degree. She also has a management diploma from Leicester University, as well as several leadership and certificate courses through the Institute for Global Tobacco Control at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg's School of Public Health. Mrs. McGraw is currently the project manager for the Food Policy Project at the Heart Foundation of Jamaica since 2017. And this is facilitated through a grant from the Global Health Advocacy Incubator. a part of Bloomberg's philanthropy's efforts to tackle the global obesity epidemic. She's eminently qualified because she has also acted throughout the region as a special advisor on tobacco control to the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, where she supported several Caribbean countries in scaling up tobacco control activities, including enacting tobacco control legislation. And she continues to support tobacco control activities in Jamaica. Mrs. McGaw has presented at several regional and international conferences on regional project successes in tobacco control. So welcome. Of course, I'd also like to welcome from the Heart Foundation of Jamaica, Miss Vonetta Nurse, who is currently the Advocacy Officer for the Global Health Advocacy Project at the Heart Foundation, where she's involved in sensitizing and advocating for obesity prevention and food policies, and supports the Jamaica Coalition for Tobacco Control. She holds a master's degree in public health from the University of West Indies and is pursuing further studies in public health and nutrition. And if I may say, I think she's also a past graduate of the University of West Indies. She has had professional experience in food safety, quality management, standards development, health education and promotion, and advocacy and public health nutrition. She is passionate about improving the health and lives of the Caribbean population, adults and children, through health promotion and policies for the prevention of non-communicable diseases, NCDs. And last but not least, I'd like to welcome Mr. Francois Chalifour. He's currently the Director of Marketing and Development for the Wisynco Group Limited. His career began in Montreal, Canada during the early 90s as an auditor. So he's a finance guy, right? And subsequently as financial controller at Bariatrix International. He moved to Jamaica and took up a position at the Jamaica Drink Company, where he served as its managing director for several years. When Jamaica Drink was amalgamated into the Wisynco Group, he continued his role overseeing manufacturing of the company's beverage brands. And in 2012, he took on the role of Director of Marketing and Development for the entire group. Mr. Chalifour represents the interest of the Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association. To him, I say welcome as well. At this point, I'd like to invite our first speaker. That would be Dr. Patrice Pearce to deliver her presentation on this important topic. Dr. Pearce?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to present on this topic. My presentation for today will be looking at the scientific basis for daily limits on food nutrients in food and the consequences as manifested in non-communicable diseases. So up until the late 1960s, there was very little information on food labels to identify the nutrient content of the food. Then from 1941 to about 1966, when information such as calorie, sodium content was included on some food labels, those were added by regulations from the US Food and Drug Administration to be there for special dietary uses. That is, it was intended to meet a particular dietary need, which was caused by either physical, pathologic, or some other condition. Now, at that time, most meals were generally prepared at home and from basic ingredients. So there was very little demand at the time for nutritional information. However, with the number of processed foods increasing in the marketplace, consumers started to request information, which could help them to understand what was in the products that they were purchasing. So the FDA developed a working draft of various approaches for nutrition labeling. And they asked for comments from people like nutritionists, consumer groups, and from the food industry. These regulations were finalized in about 1973. Now, the nutrition label, it describes the content, the nutrient content of a food, and really they're there to help consumers in their food selection. Now, the information that is provided must be selected on the basis that is consistent with dietary recommendations. The information contained should be truthful and it should not mislead consumers. Now, at the same time, you want your labeling regulations to provide incentives to manufacturers. So you want the labels to encourage manufacturers to develop products that will promote public health and to assist consumers in following the dietary recommendations. So the FDA has recently updated the nutrition facts label on packaged food and drinks. The refreshed design is to update the information and to make it easier for consumers to make informed choices that will contribute towards healthy eating habits and to reduce preventable deaths that are linked to poor nutrition. So one of the first things there you'll see is the serving size. And in that section, that's the basis for determining the number of calories in each nutrient and the percentage daily value of a food. You use it to compare the serving size and how much you actually eat. All right, serving sizes are given to us in familiar units such as cups or pieces, and then it will follow up with the metric amount. So you'll get a number in grams, for example. The serving size reflects the amount that people typically eat and drink. Now, the serving size is not a recommendation of how much you should eat. In the section where you see calories, if you want to manage your weight, either you want to lose weight or maybe you want to gain weight or you want to maintain weight, this section should be especially helpful. The key is to balance how many calories you're eating with how many calories your body uses so that you don't take in excess calories and those calories become converted into fat. The nutrient section, which is the largest section of the nutrition facts panel, you can use the label to support your personal dietary needs. So you look for foods that contain more of the nutrients you want to get and less of the nutrients you want to limit. Nutrients that you need to get more of typically are dietary fiber, vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium. The recommended goal is to consume at least 100% of the daily value for these nutrients each day. Nutrients that we should consume less of are things like saturated fat, sodium, added sugars, and you want to stay below the 100% daily value for these nutrients on a daily basis. So the nutrient section of the nutrition facts panel, it has both nutrients that you want to increase and nutrients that you want to either avoid or reduce. Where you see percent daily value, That section tells you whether the nutrients, for example, is saturated fat, or if it's like your dietary fiber, how much of it is in one serving of the food. Okay, so if it's a little, you would see a value of less than 5% of the daily value. High would be considered having more than 20% of the daily value. And then you have a footnote section. The footnote is really to just explain what daily value means and tells you how much of a nutrient in a serving of food contributes to a daily diet. 2,000 calories a day is used for general nutrition advice. So the father of toxicology, Paracelsus, coined this famous dictum: what is there that is not poison? All things are poison, and nothing is without poison. Solely the dose determines that a thing is a poison or not. And we can also call the famous quote from Hippocrates, let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food. Okay, this introduces us to the idea of the potent impact of food on health. Nowadays, the role of food in chronic diseases, including things like our cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes and various metabolic syndromes, is undisputed. Food plays an important role in managing these conditions. So you might wonder why I would have quoted Paracelsus there, and what does toxicology have to do with a presentation on nutrition and health? Really, it is to establish that foods are not inherently bad or good. What is important is how much and how consistently one consumes a particular food. The use of these terms can cause people to develop an unhealthy relationship with food and diet. Now, I'm not saying that all foods are good and can be consumed equally. No, that's not what I'm saying. There are foods that are lower in essential nutrients when you compare them to other foods. However, all foods do provide the body with fuel, and having good health is not just about what we eat, it is also about how much we eat. And other factors such as physical activity, regular medical checkups, those things also play a crucial role in maintaining good health. Food is a basic human need. We all need to eat in order to survive. However, the relationship that we have with food is very complex. What we eat will impact our health. If we eat too little, we could end up being undernourished. However, if we consume too much, and if what we're consuming is foods high in calorie and low in nutrients, then we end up with negative outcomes for health. Now, non-communicable diseases are also termed chronic diseases, and they tend to be lifelong conditions, or they last a long time. And we usually acquire them as a result of genetics, physiological, the environment, and other behavioral factors. Now, the most common of these are cardiovascular diseases, type 2 diabetes, and cancer. Obesity and being overweight are frequently associated with the presence of one or more of these Ncds. Now, nutritional epidemiology has been used to establish the association of specific foods and nutrients or overall dietary patterns with the risk of developing cancers, cardiovascular disease, and all the Ntds that I listed before. They have also established that link between things like being overweight, having high blood pressure, developing insulin resistance, or having hyperglycemia. So there is a large body of studies that is observational studies that are available, and these are also complemented with well-designed randomized trials that have, for example, shown the benefits of lower salt intake or replacing saturated fats with polyunsaturated fats, or comparing different dietary patterns. We know that diets that are low in the intake of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, and seeds, or diets that are high in salt, all of those can be responsible for a significant portion of the disease burden that we're experiencing globally. Now, being overweight or obese actually puts you at a higher risk of dying at a younger age. Now, more than 4 out of 10 adults globally are overweight, and this works out to about 1.9 billion persons. And of this figure, 34% of them are obese. So that's about 650 million people who are obese. Now, this problem, it not only affects adults, but children are also getting heavier. 1 in 5 children are now overweight. And what we mean by overweight or obese? So overweight is if you have a body mass index that is greater than 25, and obese, you have a body mass index that is greater than 30. Now, basically, your body mass index is a ratio of your weight to your height. So if you are overweight, it means you're carrying too much weight for your height. Now, on a fundamental level, becoming obese is as a result of consuming more energy than you expend. Now, having a high BMI is really a top risk factor in contributing towards disability-adjusted life years. This was first observed in high-income countries, but now you see it right across the globe. The prevalence of obesity has steadily increased in all global regions. So if you look at the graph from showing the trend from 1975 up to 2016, you see that there is a steady increase. So same for Jamaica, here we are, our prevalence is at about 1 in 4 adults. So this is of serious concern. The Caribbean has one of the 3rd highest rate prevalence of obesity. What researchers have also observed is that for middle-income countries, low and middle-income countries, you find that the obesity rate is higher in urbanized areas when compared to more rural regions. So where are we heading? Well, through the course of the last decade, we see that the rate of obesity is progressively increasing, and that will continue. And this rise is in conjunction with chronic illnesses that are associated with obesity, such as the diabetes, cardiovascular diseases. These are now the top causes of death globally. And the trend will continue. It is expected that by 2030, 51% of adults in North America will be obese. And that is if there is no intervention. So that's shown by the orange trend line. That's a linear model, just looking at current variables and using that to predict what the future might hold. The brown trend line puts us at about 41% in 2030. That is adjusted for independent variables such as anti-obesity campaigns. Additionally, this model that they used, it did not look at future trends for childhood obesity rates, because that will have an impact on future prevalence of obesity in adults. So where this chart is showing us that the number one risk factor for death is high blood pressure. Having hypertension accounts for 10.4 million deaths globally. Okay, and that's followed by other diet-related diseases. So the top 6 diet-related Ncds are high blood pressure, high blood sugar, obesity, a high sodium diet, a diet low in whole grains, a diet low in fruits, a diet low in vegetables. All of these together account for 31.8 million premature deaths. And these are global figures. So what's really leading us to this? It's no secret. There are several factors that have been attributed to the rise of diet-related Ncds. However, the Western diet is considered to be a major contributor of the growing rate of obesity and Ncds. Things like rising income, urbanization, globalization, and trade liberalization, these things have led to changes in behavior, and they have led to changes in our diet. Now, most of the current lifestyle trends, they emphasize the importance of healthy eating. However, we continue to see foods that are high in fat and sugar as a major component of the Western diet. And this is corresponding to that steady rise in obesity. So the management of obesity and tackling these Ncds, we have to acknowledge that diet modification will probably have the greatest impact on this growing epidemic. Now, the typical Western diet is a diet that is low in fruits and vegetables and high in saturated fats, high in added sugar and sodium. Now, more importantly, this diet also consists of very large portions of high caloric foods. The excess sugar accounts for about 13% of the daily caloric intake, with beverages constituting most of the added sugar that people consume. But other sources of added sugar include things like cookies and cakes and candies. Now, the human body does require small amounts of sodium. We need it to conduct nerve impulses, for muscle contraction and relaxation, and to maintain a proper balance of water and minerals. Now, the estimated amount of sodium that we need on a daily basis is 500 milligrams of sodium. That's all we need to maintain our vital functions. But too much sodium in the diet can actually lead to high blood pressure, heart disease, and stroke. It can also cause calcium losses. And some of these losses, they are pulled from the bone. Now, high sodium consumption is having more than 5 grams of salt per day. And when you couple that with low potassium intake, that will contribute to your having an increased risk of developing cardiovascular diseases. The mean salt intake in low and middle income countries exceeds the recommended maximum intake. So reducing salt to about 6 grams per day could prevent annually about 2.5 million deaths, and that's globally. And a 15% reduction of salt intake over the decade in low and middle income countries could forestall about 3.1 million deaths. If you look at the salt intake, we're currently having up to 12 grams of salt per day when we should be having less than 5 grams. But what is really striking to me is the amount of sugar that we have in our diet. It's recommended that we should have no more than 24 grams of added sugar per day, but on average, people are consuming about 88 grams of sugar. Now, a lot of these recommendations are based on a 2,000 calorie diet. The American Heart Association suggests that the limit on added sugar should be no more than 100 calories per day. And that's for most women. For men, it can go up to about 150 calories per day. When we look at saturated fats, it's recommended that we limit saturated fats to less than 10% of your daily calories. So if you're following a 2,000 calorie diet, that means only 200 calories should come from saturated fats. And a gram of saturated fats is about 9 calories. So therefore, the amount of saturated fats we should consume in a day is about 22 grams. When it comes to trans fats, however, there are no safe limits of trans fats to eat each day. So we need to try and avoid trans fats completely. Even if a food is advertised as being trans fat free, it can still contain small amounts of trans fats. So you have to read the ingredients label to see if it contains any partially hydrogenated oils as an ingredient. And if it does, then it's possible that it has trans fats in it if you see partially hydrogenated oil. So on a nutrition label, if you have less than 0.5 grams of trans fat, you can put that as 0. So if the food item contains 4.8 or 0.3 grams, you can put that as 0. But that doesn't mean that it's trans fat free. So on this slide, we have a comparison of the Mediterranean diet versus the Western diet. Now, the Mediterranean diet pattern was first identified in the 1950s. It's a diet that was followed in coastal regions of Southern European countries, primarily Italy and Greece. And it has been associated with lower mortality rates from coronary heart disease. Current recommendations for the Med diet, it is promoting meals that are heavily based on a variety of fruits, vegetables, and whole grain cereals. This is in contrast to the Western diet, where we see the diets are dominated by highly processed foods. So a lot of refined grain, a lot of processed and red meat. People consume a lot of sweets, desserts, fried foods, and high-fat dairy products. These diets, the Western diet, you compare it, it has very little fruit intake and very little intake of vegetables as well. So one of the key differences to that, a lot of the research that has gone into examining the Mediterranean diet is that the types of fats that are included in these diets are very different. In the Mediterranean diet, the fats that are there that come from things like olive oil or having fatty fish like salmon, these are unsaturated fatty acids. So things like our omega-3 fatty acids are higher in the Mediterranean diet. In our Western diet, our diet consists mainly of saturated fats. Other things that are more abundant in the Mediterranean diet would be things like phytochemicals such as antioxidants, polyphenols, flavonoids, carotenoids, and these things contribute very low energy content to your food. So fruits and vegetables are predominantly featured in this type of diet. The recommendations is for us to consume 5 to 7 servings of fruits and vegetables per day. However, in westernized countries, there is inadequate intakes to meet this target. Another key difference is our protein consumption type. The Mediterranean diet is heavily based on having fish, whereas our Western diets, there is a lot of red meat that is consumed and very little fish. Now, a poor quality diet along with insufficient activities we know are the key risk factors for NCD development. So any approach that we're going to look at to combat NCDs, we must include efforts to improve the diet and to increase physical activity. So we need governments to do things like provide policies that will support environments for sustainable, healthy behaviors in order for us to reduce the incidences of NCDs. Now, people's behaviors are going to be influenced by things such as globalization, economic growth, and unplanned urbanization. So governments need to create an environment where doing the things that will prevent NCDs are easy. So for example, having nutrition policies which ensure that people can have consistent, affordable supplies of fruits and vegetables. So you may have to look at your agricultural policies to kind of make these things happen. Where it comes to, distance that people may have to travel in order to purchase fresh fruits and vegetables. Or it could be that people have issues around the storage and shelf life that's associated with these types of foods. Other places where we can have an impact is in early childhood nutrition. This can have a significant impact on growth and development and health during adulthood. So school feeding programs, which focus on the provision of healthy foods, along with how to prepare healthy foods. And having these concurrent education campaign and counseling that could be provided by healthcare professionals. Now, other measures that can be used, and many countries around the globe are looking at having punitive measures, such as a sugar tax. There are about 50 countries that have implemented a tax on sugar-sweetened beverages. Some of them are UK, Barbados, Chile, France, Mexico, and South Africa. And there are a few cities in the US that have also instituted a sugar tax. I think San Francisco, California, and Philadelphia in Pennsylvania are some of those cities. Now, some countries, they have a tiered tax design, which applies different tax rates depending on the sugar content, and some of them use an ad valorem tax. Now, Mexico has one of the highest levels of diabetes and overweight and obesity in the world. Starting January 2014, Mexico implemented a tax of 1 peso per liter. So that was an approximately 10% increase in the price on sugar-sweetened drinks. And the aim of this was to reduce consumption. Since then, there's some studies that show that household purchases of sugar-sweetened beverages in Mexico reduced by about 7.6%. That's in the first 2 years after the tax took effect. Now, taxing as a tool is to really compel, my apologies there, is to really compel behavior change. So tax has been used to change behavior towards smoking and drinking. Now, in order for taxation to really be impactful, the taxes have to be significant enough for persons, because you will have persons that have disposable income, so they are elastic enough in their spending, and they can continue to purchase these sugar-sweetened drinks. However, persons with less disposable income are more price sensitive, and they will tend to modify their purchases. Another thing that they saw coming out of the sugar tax, this was in the UK, a prominent soda company, rather than have the price of their product increase, they reformulated and they resized their package in order to maintain the price point. So there are different ways that we can modify behavior, both for the individual and for the industry. Now, one challenge that people do have is they have a real hard time connecting information that is on a food label with the actual health impacts. So studies have shown that in Europe, 30% of persons mistakenly think that the caloric needs of a child was greater than that of an adult male. This really underscores the need for clear and explicit food labels. All right. Obesity is a complex social disease. It requires both social and political transformation. Personal responsibility has been the mantra of many in the food industry, and even many governments believe that as well. But in the face of things like documented addictive nature of sugar and refined and processed food, willpower is kind of a myth. The responsibility of governments is really to protect its citizens and not to really have profits over public health. We must end the era of privatizing profits and socializing the cost of obesity. Now, if we look at what's currently happening around the world, we are in a kind of perfect storm that we don't really want to be in, where non-communicable disease epidemic meets the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the most troubling observations coming out of this pandemic is that persons who are obese, diabetic, or hypertensive tend to experience more severe outcomes if they contract coronavirus. So if we look at the hospitalization rates of COVID-19, and this information was collated in 2020, you find that the hospitalization rate was 4.6 per 100,000 of the population. And of that, 90% of the hospitalized patients had some kind of underlying condition. Hypertension was the most common comorbidity, and this was among older patients, so patients older than 49 years old. That accounted for the #1 reason that they were admitted to hospital. In the younger groups, obesity was the condition most often seen in COVID-19 patients. About 49% prevalence of those admitted in the younger category. Now, these stats were taken from Dallas last year. We see that persons with diabetes and obesity accounted for 50% of the total hospitalized patients with COVID-19. And even more shocking, diabetes alone accounted for 47% of all the deaths from COVID-19. Now, conditions related to obesity include inflammation. They leave the lungs of obese patients more susceptible to COVID-19, and that may kind of explain why they are more likely to die from these diseases. Now, NCDs are responsible for over 40 million deaths each year, and of that number, approximately 50 million will occur in people who are under the age of 70. And most of these deaths will occur in low-income and middle-income countries. So poverty contributes to NCDs, and NCDs contribute to poverty. When you're poor, your diet will tend to contain foods that are going to increase your risk of developing NCDs. Along with having things like less access to basic medical care, which could lead to early detection of NCDs. Now, the cost of treatment and care for a person with an NCD reduces their disposable income, and it can actually drive people into poverty. So, these people, they are also less likely to have health insurance to assist with the burden of care, and they have to pay for the cost of care out of pocket. And this risks them being impoverished, and it can disrupt schooling for children and the stability of families. So in some countries, the lowest income households have the highest levels of NCD risk factors, and they have the most severe consequences if they do develop an NCD. Ntds will also lead to loss of productivity, and they cost billions of dollars to care for persons who develop an NCD. Now, consumers need to have access to clear, consistent, evidence-based information when they're deciding which foods to buy. This is particularly important if we are going to control the epidemic of NCDs through diet modification. Now, unfortunately, a majority of consumers, they find the information presented on the nutrition facts panel too small to read. And this is important as we have an aging population. And also many people found it very difficult to understand. A recent study in the US, it tested the relative effectiveness of warning labels versus calorie labels on sugar sweetened drinks. And what the researchers found is that parents who saw a warning label that read, safety warning, drinking beverages with added sugar contributes to obesity, diabetes, and tooth decay. These parents were less likely to purchase sugar sweetened drinks than those who saw a simple calorie label. Now, most said the warning label would change their belief about a beverage, the healthfulness of a beverage, and it would encourage them to purchase few of those beverages for their children. Now, approximately 75% of those in the study were in favor of adding warning labels to sugar sweetened drinks. Another part of the issue, it's not always easy for us to know if a product contains added sugar because sugar goes by many different names and most types consist of glucose or fructose. Avoiding excess intakes of sugar in your daily diet, if it's going to be an important strategy for us, we can't depend on consumers looking at the ingredients to know, well, this has sugar in it, all right? Because there are many different sweeteners that are used, but all of them are sources of sugar. So it might be hard for a consumer to be able to stop and determine that this product contains added sugar just by reading the ingredients list. Now, sugar isn't only in beverages, it's in baked goods, and even foods that we consider to be healthy can be high in added sugar. For example, a leading brand of yogurt contained 7 teaspoons or 29 grams of sugar per serving. There was a breakfast whole grain bar made with real fruits, and it had 15 grams of added sugar. A brand cereal with raisins being advertised as having no high fructose corn syrup actually contains 20 grams of sugar per serving. That's almost all of your daily recommended amount that you should be consuming. So we need to change labels so that they actually help consumers to make healthy choices and decisions by providing them with an easy way to just understand what's in the product and how it might impact their health. So they're able to recognize when there is hidden sugar. And this is just a few examples of labels. I'm showing you that, it's not the easiest thing. This takes effort to read, and people shopping don't necessarily have the time to devote to check every product they're going to take up.
Okay, Patrice, Dr. Pearce, I think you've made an excellent case for us being educated on this matter. At this point, respectfully, I would like to ask the next presenter, Ms. Ms. Philippa O'Connor to queue up her presentation and begin. So thank you very much, Dr. Pearce. Really appreciate all the insights which went into your presentation. And the other presenters, I would like to give them now a chance to, make their case. So thank you. So at this point, I'd like to welcome and invite Ms. O'Connor to upload her slides and comments her presentation. Ms. O'Connor?
Thank you. I'm unable to share. It's telling me that I cannot start screen share while the other participant is sharing. Okay, perfect. All right, so good afternoon again, everyone. My name is Philippa O'Connor and I am from the Bureau of Standards, Jamaica. I will be making a presentation this afternoon regarding Jamaica's experience with the CRS-5 standard, and that's the standard specification for the labeling of prepackaged foods to include front of package labeling. I'll also be sharing on the comments process, the type of comments that we have received on the draft standard at the BSG and how those comments were dealt with and are being dealt with because the process has not been completed. Now, on my preliminary page here, I have a few different front of package labeling systems being displayed here. But the primary one of focus for this afternoon, well, to some extent, is the black octagon, which is the symbol being proposed in the CRS-5 standard. So to get a better understanding of where we are at now nationally in terms of Jamaica and by extension the CARICOM region, I just wanted to provide a very brief overview or background into the genesis of the discussions. So at a high-level meeting of CARICOM institutions in February 2017, a proposal was made for the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality, that's the CROSQ, and CROSQ is the regional standards body. So the Bureau of Standards Jamaica is the national standards body in Jamaica, and CROSQ is the regional standards body for the CARICOM region. So that discussion was had, and the proposal was made at the CROSQ level to undertake the revision of the labeling standards. And this process was to be spearheaded by Jamaica and Suriname, as well as to be involved in the promotion of mandatory food labeling. Now, in lieu of that discussion, the revision of the CRS-5 standard specification for the labeling of prepackaged foods is being executed by the Regional Technical Subcommittee for the labeling of prepackaged foods, and the process is being spearheaded by the CARICOM member state Suriname in collaboration with Jamaica. So for a better understanding, the Regional Technical Subcommittee, more commonly known as the RTSC, is the regional committee responsible for developing and revising the CRS-5 standard. So there are two tiers of work, which I will get into in the subsequent slides. There's the regional work and there's a national work. The national work is spearheaded by the National Mural Committee, and I will get into that in the later presentation. Now, as I made mention earlier, I have here on screen the high-in black octagon, which was the front of package labeling system that was being proposed in the CRS-5. And I said was, or rather is being, because there are some additional discussions and there have been some requests for additional front of package labeling schemes to be included, which I will also discuss in a little bit more further on in the presentation. Now, we have instituted at the national level what we call a National Mural Committee. And the National Mural Committee is responsible for the national discussions regarding a standard. So I made mention of earlier a regional technical subcommittee, which has been instituted at the regional level. So there's a regional committee and then there's a national Mural committee. So what the national Mural committee does is that it filters national discussions back to the regional committee. So the NMC pretty much is the body that makes decisions regarding the draft standard and then relays this decision back to CARICOM via the RTSC as a national position on behalf of Jamaica. Currently, we have 5 stakeholder groupings being represented on the National Mural Committee, and that includes government being represented by the Scientific Research Council, the Ministry of Health and Wellness, the National Compliance and Regulatory Authority. We also have the consumer groups being represented by the Consumer Affairs Commission and the National Consumers League. The academics are also being represented by the University of Technology, Northern Caribbean University, and the University of the West Indies. The private sector being represented by the Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association, and the non-government organizations are being represented by the Heart Foundation of Jamaica and the Diabetes Association of Jamaica. I also want to bring your attention to the fact that PAHO is listed here as an observer. And this particularly means that PAHO does not vote, they do not participate in the discussions of the committee. However, they do sit in to have an hear then read the conversations as an observer. So they are not an active participant. So what has Jamaica done thus far in lieu of the establishment of the National Mural Committee and or participation in the regional activities regarding the revision of the CRS-5 standard that will include, or rather that has included, the element of front of package labeling? Now, in 2018, specifically August, we first introduced front of package labeling to the Jamaican stakeholders. And it was in August 2018 that the revision process for the CRS-5 standard had begun. We had the draft issued for public comments between the period October 2018 to February 2019. And ultimately public comments, meaning that we are required as per the WTO, that's the World Trade Organization, TBT agreement, to ensure that once we have a measure coming on stream, and particularly this one that is a mandatory requirement in Jamaica, that's the CRS-5, we are required to allow 60 days public comments period where we advise the populace that, hey, we have this standard coming on stream. We want you to scrutinize it, to take a look at it, to identify any gaps, and to provide us with your feedback. So that in essence is really the public comments period. So we had that draft we issued for comments during the period October 2018 to February 2019. And in March 2019, we submitted our comments to CrossQ. Now, we've had several face-to-face regional meetings, and we had one in September 2018, another one in May 2019, and another meeting in July 2019, where the regional technical committees met in both Trinidad and Tobago and Suriname to discuss the CRS-5 standard. In July 2019, the front of package labeling was presented to the stakeholders again, and the draft was reissued for a second round of public comments, which ended on 15th of January 2020. Now, seeing the impact or the significance of this standard on both the health sector and the trade sector, we saw it necessary to have both the Foreign Affairs Ministry, the Ministry of Health, and the Ministry of Trade at the table. And so an interagency meeting was held with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, along with the Bureau of Standards Jamaica, on Friday, August 16, 2019. Subsequent to that, we had a follow-up meeting with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Health, and then it was the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture, and Fisheries, also with the Bureau of Standards on August 19, 2019. Subsequent to that meeting, we met again. The three ministries aforementioned, we met again with the Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association. And as I made mention earlier, the intent of those meetings was because of the the pending impact that this standard, particularly the front of package labeling element, will have on both the parties who are health concerned and trade concerned. So we had another regional technical subcommittee meeting in Suriname in March 2020. And post that meeting, we had follow-up meetings with the National Mural Committee. Now, each time the regional technical subcommittee meets, is to discuss the position of the different CARICOM member states and to arrive at some form of decision as to the way forward, and also to dispose of any comments where necessary, that has been retrieved on the draft standard. The final part of the process, which is where we're at now, is that the standard was registered as a final draft CARICOM standard, and it was circulated for approval via a voting, and its voting period ended on the 31st of May 2021. So you might ask, what is this voting period? The voting period prescribes that each CARICOM member state has one vote, and there is a 75% threshold that is needed for a CARICOM regional standard to advance from the regional committee to the cross-view council to COTED, which is the Council for Trade and Economic Development, which will ultimately pass the standard to be gazetted as a regional standard. Now, this voting period, we had a meeting at the BSJ, via a Zoom on June 4, 2021. We had a meeting of the National Mural Committee to arrive at a national position regarding how we will vote, whether we'll be voting in support of the draft or whether we will vote not in support of the draft. And at that particular meeting, we had a comments breakdown as follows. The academics, they're represented by the UE and the UTEC, supported the draft standard. Government, represented by the SRC, the NCRA, and the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Well, the Ministry of Health and Wellness supported the draft. However, the SRC and the National Compliance and Regulatory Authority were not in support of the draft, and they have requested that additional FOPL designs be included prior to the finalization of the standard. The consumer groups, the Consumer Affairs Commission and the National Consumers League did not support the final draft, and a similar concern, rather our comment is that additional FOPL designs should be included prior to the finalization of the standard. The private sector did not support the draft, primarily due to the presence of the high-end octagon only. So that's also in tandem with the previous request that other FOPL designs should be included. And the non-government organizations represented by the Heart Foundation of Jamaica and the Diabetes Association of Jamaica indicated their support of the draft. The process of majority vote was applied, and via this, the vote for the June 4th meeting, it was discussed by the government of Jamaica at the cabinet level, and they had endorsed the decision made by the NMC on June 4, and so that was relayed to cross-view on the 30th of July. So what is the next step, seeing that that was submitted to cross-view? Now, the standard, as I had indicated earlier, requires a 75% threshold vote to advance to the next stage of the process, which would be approval by the cross-view council and subsequently approval by the Council for Trade and Economic Development, which would be quoted. Now, that 75% threshold was not met. There are some CARICOM member states who abstained. There are some who supported, and there are some who voted against it. So in light of all of that, the 75% threshold was not achieved, and so the standard cannot advance in the next stage of the regional process. So what will happen is that it has to be reverted back to the regional technical subcommittee for a way forward to be determined. So either the RTSC will make a determination based on consensus amongst the CARICOM member states to either retain the high-end black octagon, which seems to be the main source of contention or concern regarding the draft. So the RTSC will have to make that decision whether they will keep the FOPL component or remove it, or as per some requests by some member states, include additional FOPL designs. So that will be the next steps regarding that. And that would finalize my presentation. Dr. Thompson, back to you. I'm not sure if there are any questions.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connor. Well done and well within your time. What I will do in the interest of time and everyone's benefits, because some have been waiting a little longer than others, I will take all questions at the end. So at this point, I'd like to invite both Ms. McGaw and Mrs. McGaw and Ms. Nurse to load their slides and commence their presentation. I'm not sure how they will be handling that. So.
Okay.
Screen.
We need full screen, right? Screen.
Okay.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. We want to thank the Faculty of Science and Technology for inviting us here to this presentation. It's going to be done in two parts. I will start, and then I'll have Ms. Nurse Vanetta do the second part. So next slide, Vanetta. So it will be broken into project background, NCDs and other pandemics in Jamaica's health landscape, front of package warning labels, and where are we now? So the title of our project at the Heart Foundation is to support a healthy Jamaican population by reducing obesity through public and policymaker awareness around healthy eating and advocating for policy change. So our priorities there, which are all evidence-based, looking at front of package labeling, support for healthy food in schools, restriction of the marketing of unhealthy foods, and of course, a sugar-free beverage tax. Next. So the Jamaica health landscape, the nutrition transition from natural to processed foods. You know, we've had the pre-packaged and ultra-processed foods more readily available. Many are high in salt, unhealthy fats and sugar, and the previous speaker did speak to this. Research has connected these nutrients of concern to increased risk of overweight, obesity, and NCDs, such as those listed. WHO has actually recommended a reduction in consumption of foods high in unhealthy fats, added sugar, and sodium. Next. So a closer look at the Jamaican reality, and these are local statistics. 78% of all deaths were caused by NCDs and is related to eating practices. The Jamaica Health and Lifestyle Survey, which was commissioned by the University of the West Indies and the Ministry of Health, is showing us that 1 in 2 Jamaicans are overweight, 1 in 3 Jamaicans aged 15 and older have hypertension, and unfortunately, some are not aware, and 1 in 8 has diabetes. So this, of course, makes a strain and a cost to the economy and to individuals. And then there is a link to COVID-19, which Patrice did speak to earlier. Next. So front of package warning labels. The solution for NCD prevention and control is a suite of evidence-based population-wide intervention, and that includes front of package warning labels. Next. So there are several types of nutrition labels. You have the health claims, you have nutritional content claims, or nutritional labels. And it's considered to be an important approach to provide supportive environments for consumers to make better choices. Next. So in Jamaica, let's just briefly look at this. The lack of policy intervention on nutritional information on label. There is, no mandatory labeling. Although there are some products that do have labels because if they'll be using it for exports. Consumers spend very little time making food choices, less than 10 seconds. Again, this is from some research. So the challenges for consumers is missing information. Back of the pack nutrition labels may be technical, difficult to read, and so on. Consumers are left at a considerable disadvantage and need an easy way to make healthier choices. And shoppers prefer simple front of package labels that are immediately visible and require less access. Next.
Sorry.
Right. So how does the front of package labeling fit in? And this is a question that we are asked. There are symbols and rating systems placed on the front of packages and foods, and it's again processed foods, foods that have been changed from their natural state. A simple clear graphic on the front of package or processed food products provides information about the nutrients of concern that will be related to obesity, diabetes, and other NCDs. Next. So again, these are just some of the types of front of package labeling: non-interpretive system, semi-interpretive systems, and some of the countries they're used in, summary information, and then the interpretive systems such as the warning labels. These are some of the countries that have actually implemented the black octagon, and that's Brazil, Chile, Peru, Uruguay, and Mexico. And just recently this week, Argentina has implemented or will be implementing octagonal warning labels. And the nutrient profile, which outlines the nutrition criteria, is here for the label. So this one is specifically interpretive warning labels, and it's found to be most effective. And we'll share how we got to that conclusion. Next. So the evidence, again, a lot of work that has been done and a lot of what we've shared is evidence-based. So there are very many research articles from Uruguay, Brazil, Mexico, Canada, and Chile. And why we're highlighting Chile is that since they implemented their octagon label, the studies show that some of the studies show that the changes in the mother's attitudes towards food purchases, children were able to identify the unhealthy products because of how simple the label was. There was a decrease in purchase of foods in the high-end category. Reformulation has happened, and this, as we said, could be one of the benefits of having the octagon labels, as was discussed earlier, where by reformulating and reducing, then you're not going to have that label on your product. And of course, no job losses or wages or profit decreases were seen in these studies. Next.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
It's a little bit difficult to advance the slide.
Then we have, okay.
Is your one slide over? Hold on. Okay.
Just to again bring up the fact that we are now looking at local research. This study was done by the University of the West Indies, the University of Technology, the Pan American Health Organization, and in collaboration with the Ministry of Health and Wellness. And this particular study looked at the black octagon high-end warning system. They looked at 9 parishes. It was done between December 2020 and February 2021. And it aimed to examine the best performing front of package labels in Jamaica by comparing to several. So the octagonal warning included it in the cross-Q standard. So this is what we're saying. It is actually included. Then we looked at the magnifying glass and the traffic light. Next. So here are the results. The participants were randomly assigned to view packages 1 of the 4 FOPL types and asked which product they would buy or not. And again, the black octagon model was the best performing model. And compared to the control group of products with the facts up front, they were 2 times more likely to correctly select the least harmful product. They were nearly 2 times more likely to decide to purchase the least harmful product, and 9 times more likely to identify when a product contains excessive amounts of sodium, sugar, and saturated fat. Next. So,
sorry.
We're not alone. We're not alone.
Trying to get there.
Yes.
The internet is giving me a little bit of trouble. Okay.
So we're not alone. The growing call for front of package labeling has been recorded Leading global and regional public health organizations have called on governments to introduce the front of package warning label as part of a comprehensive policy. And some listed here: the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights to Health, Pan American Health Organization, the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARPHA, World Cancer Research Fund, the NCD Alliance, and a growing number of CARICOM ministries and health professionals. Next. And just for information, these are some of the countries that do have mandatory labels. And then the newest addition would be Argentina, which will be done within a year to a year and a half. Next. Okay, so I'm going to go and hand over to my advocacy officer, Ms. Vonetta Nurse, which will take you through the next sections. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll just take you through where we are and why we continue to advocate for front of package warning labels. Or the previous presenter would have indicated, provided an overview of the process as it relates to the CARICOM regional standards for labeling of prepackaged foods. And as she mentioned, we're in the approval stage where 15 member states are required to vote for the standard to move forward. And as she would have mentioned, on March 30, a vote was held at the National Mural Committee, where the majority of stakeholders initially supported the standard. However, at a meeting at June 4, a revote was held where several government agencies would have changed their vote. After a referral to cabinet, the government decided not to support the CRS-5 with the inclusion of the Black Octagonal model. Therefore, Jamaica was one of 3 countries that ended up voting negatively on the standard. 6 countries voted positively and 6 countries abstained. So the discussion actually continues at PROSCU, so we continue our advocacy. Okay, so from our public health point of view, we have some concerns as it relates to the process and the discourse and the turn of events. First of all, we continue to advocate for the implementation of the Black Octagonal High-In warning label because of the robust evidence that shows that when compared to other types of front-of-pack labeling, it is the most effective in allowing consumers to identify and make healthier choices. My colleague, Mrs. McGaw, would have mentioned some of the research and the research that was actually done in Jamaica. Front-of-package labeling is a public health tool. So from our public health point of view, justifications for use of a particular model should focus on health, which is the objective of front-of-package labeling. Notably, as we speak about health and trade, the World Trade Organization, the agreements do allow for countries to implement public health measures that may have trade implications when there is a clear public health goal, in this case, the prevention and management of non-communicable diseases in Jamaica. We are concerned about the lack of evidence-based decision-making, impartiality in the decision-making process. And studies have actually shown that multiple front-of-package labels, models, can actually confuse the consumer, and the health objective of front-of-package labeling will not be achieved. So you would have seen some of our articles listing our concerns as we continue to advocate based on what the research evidence is showing. So our advocacy for front-of-package warning labels continues. We note that the octagons are simple, clearly visible labels. You see them at the bottom of the screen. Notably, not all products would carry this label. Only those above the thresholds that are set in the PAHO nutrient profile model that are harmful to health if consumed in excess. So the label, the octagon, would only appear on products that pose the greatest nutritional health risk. This approach may be easier for consumers to notice. So warning labels are either there or are not, and interpret. So less complex computations, less complex comparisons between products. Also, positively can stimulate product reformulation. there have been anecdotal messages we've seen, which indicate that maybe 90% of our products would carry a label if we follow the nutrient threshold, the current profile in the draft standard. And that's alarming to even think that so many of our products would fall into that category. But the good side is that quite a few, we've noticed, quite a few companies have actually started reformulating, reducing their salt, reducing their fat, reducing their sugar to offer healthier products to the consumer, which in Chile, that was a spin-off from the Octagon, the implementation of the Octagon warning label. And as it relates to, a strong economic case for investing in NCD prevention, the government of Jamaica spends more than $170 million each US dollars each year on NCDs. That's approximately 15% of the health budget. As we strive to recover from the health and economic impacts of COVID, our discussions as it relates to economic development and advancing, building back, we must prioritize a healthy population, and health must be included in all of our pro-development and economic discussions and policies. The investment case for NCDs in Jamaica was done by PAHO and the UNDP in 2018. And that document predicted that cardiovascular diseases and diabetes alone, just 2 NCDs, could cost the country 77.15 billion Jamaican dollars over 15 years. That was between 2017 and 2032, from indirect costs to treatment, care, and productivity losses. And what can we gain from investing in NCD prevention policies? Avoiding economic losses, avoiding medical costs to the tune of 29 billion Jamaican dollars, productivity loss to the tune of 47 billion Jamaican dollars, and avoiding and productivity gains as much as 4.3% in GDP, and of course, many lives saved. A modeling study from Mexico showed that front of package warning labels could actually prevent 1.3 million cases of obesity, reducing its prevalence and saving 1.8 billion US dollars in healthcare costs and indirect costs. That's a modeling study done in 2020 as they sought to implement the Black Octagon warning label. So as we move on, and I'm approaching my final slides, why FOPL? Some key messages from our campaign. The moderator, Dr. Thompson, would have spoken about, our notable campaign, which was recently launched. And again, evidence-based advocacy campaign. Foods high in sodium, fat, and sugar increase the risk of hypertension, obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and some types of cancer. We support front of package warning labels. We're on the side of health. The health of our people must come first. Again, along the lines of public health discussion that should be happening for front of package warning labels, as it is a public health tool. And we'll just leave you with our campaign. Oh, one more slide. Sorry about that. Additional evidence from our post-campaign evaluations actually show strong support from the Jamaican public for front of package warning labels. 92% support front of package warning labels on foods and drinks. 55% agree it takes too much time to interpret the nutrition facts panel. 82% strongly agree on the policy requiring clear warning labels on the front of food and beverage packages that warn when foods are high in sugar, salt, or fat. And 87% strongly agree to support government efforts to increase children's access to healthy foods and drinks. This was a nationally representative sample and a study done after one of our campaigns. So we will leave you with our campaign video, and we welcome any questions you may have going forward.
More than half of us agree it takes too much time to understand the nutrition facts panel, but we can quickly understand that 80% of deaths in Jamaica are caused by non-communicable diseases. Without knowing, we consume excess foods high in sugar, fats, and sodium, which can lead to obesity, type 2 diabetes, and hypertension. Especially now, we need warning labels on the front of our food packages to easily identify unhealthy foods. We support front-of-package warning labels. We're on the side of health. Join us. Give us octagonal, high-in-front-of-package warning labels. A message from the Heart Foundation of Jamaica and partners.
Thank you.
And thank you to the team from the Heart Foundation, both Mrs. Magal and Ms. Nurse. Now, again, we're receiving a barrage of questions, but I will respectfully hold those and allow Mr. Chalifour to upload his presentation and make his contribution to this discussion. Mr. Chalifour.
Hi, good afternoon, Mr. Thompson and everyone online. Interestingly, the camera's not coming on, never mind. Okay, let me know if you can see my presentation.
Yes, we're now seeing it. Is that full screen?
I think so, yes.
Okay, proceed, thank you.
And you can hear me properly?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much again for having me. I'm trying to move the presentation. I'm having a hard time. Did you just see me change the slide? Does it say background?
Yes, you're now on the background slide.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So much has been discussed so far about, what we're discussing today and how we somewhat got here, so I won't spend too much time on this topic or this element. I represent primarily the Jamaican Manufacturers Association, as well as what Ms. O'Connor may have referred to earlier as the private sector, where we have been fairly vocal in our, not so much, we're not against the inclusion or the preparation of two elements. One, the labeling regulation in Jamaica is significantly out of date and needs to be updated. A food label in Jamaica right now basically only needs the description of the food, its quantity, a manufacturer, and a way to contact the manufacturer, and then ingredient statement in decreasing order of quantity of ingredients is wholly insufficient to inform consumers as to what they're eating and ingesting or drinking. So we fully support the clarification and expansion of the food labeling regulation, and in particular the element that speaks to front of package labeling to inform consumers of what they are eating. We also support any activity that reduces or stops the element of non-communicable diseases. We recognize that Jamaicans and many folks in the world have become obese, and how obesity increases heart disease and other issues that create health problems for Jamaicans. And in so recognizing this, people's health habits, which include what they eat, which also includes the activities and the exercise and so on that they do, as was well explained earlier in the first presentation, that obesity is really a function of, or a result of, how much energy you consume minus how much energy you expend, All of that being, if positive, it lends itself to people having, becoming obese. What we are, though, cognizant of in our economy, in our manufacturing sector, in the behaviors and in the habits of Jamaicans, the consumption of foods from everywhere. Many countries export into Jamaica. Many foods in Jamaica are consumed without labeling whatsoever. There are agricultural products, there are street foods that are consumed, or canteen foods that are consumed regularly, where folks do not have any instruction whatsoever as to what they are eating, which have to be considered in Jamaicans making a proper assessment of the equation: how much sodium, how much fat, how much sugar they're consuming every day. So part of our approach is to really work productively with all agencies and all stakeholders in this initiative, and to support active discourse and a progression towards what the goals are, which are to reduce Ncds, which are to educate our Jamaicans as to what they are consuming every day when they go to a supermarket, when they consume street food, etc. And we've been very, very active in all elements of the development of the FOPL, of the development of the Food Industry Task Force, of many other initiatives led by government and as well as by ourselves in certain initiatives of our own marketing. We are reformulating, we are considering new ingredients, we are, as I said earlier, working with multiple agencies to work on this explicitly and openly, and to work towards a progressive solution, and are prepared to share data, work with others to get somewhere more productive. And one of the core suggestions that we have made to all the parties in discussion FOPL for the standard that right now seems to be negotiated or discussed at the cross-EU level, with likely cascading effects into Jamaica over time, is we recommend the inclusion of other standards. And on the screen now I am using what is on the left-hand side called nutrition facts. That is the sort of regulatory mandatory element for any food packaging in the US. The other element, which you see on the Ntds box and the little blue box, is what is considered the US Facts Upfront model, and is used by multiple food manufacturers in the US to provide that FOPL component, so that a consumer can immediately see how much sugar, how much sodium, how much calories they are consuming, and can do the assessment for themselves. And why we of the multiple other standards that we favor, this one is the most favored. And from an economic statistic perspective, I'll show you a slide in a couple of minutes that will sort of highlight pretty strongly what our import pattern is, and how impossible it is to stop this behemoth of an import component it is for Jamaica, as compared to Mexico, Argentina, Chile, other South American countries that have adopted the octagon model or a similar model. They're much larger economies and much larger populations, where the economic influence is internally much stronger than ours. Here is the UK model. A little bit of this is seen in Jamaica. The UK favors the use of colors. Again, a consumer can estimate and assess how much of the elements they are, or nutrients, sorry, they are consuming, and they can assess, in case of sugars, in this case is green, you can go ahead. The red is fats, and you need to be very careful and consider not consuming this element, and that's what this image is saying. The EU uses a similar approach to the UK, except they do not use color coding. The Canadian model is a little bit closer to the Chilean octagon model, using a lot of black and similar elements. This model is not yet implemented, but is on the proposals for Canada. And in so much as the black octagon model has its elements of credibility, we feel that the models that we are proposing and putting forth have been, tested and put forth by very, very credible regulatory agencies in first world countries, where studies have been made, where analysis has been made, and also the WHO's elements of mandatory nutrient declarations, transparency, threshold amounts being considered, considerations for colored indicators and interpretive words, and etc., are all considered and a part of these 4 other regulatory front of panel recommendations that we recommend be included into this standard for CrossQ and Jamaica to adopt. And here's a slide that speaks volumes as to how the Jamaican food economy is impacted by imports, and therefore the Jamaican consumer is going to see and has seen a tremendous amount of labeling already. And if you just look to the right hand side of this screen, we import $314 million US every year, which is nearly $50 billion worth of foodstuffs. And that is a tremendous amount, and it's a freight train that is difficult to slow, or even certainly not stoppable, and very difficult to slow. And it's something that local manufacturers actually compete against in many respects. And one of the reasons we feel that, on the one hand, confusion may occur if all of this product comes into Jamaica that is not compliant with a unique standard, such as the Black Octagon, as was previously proposed. And there's a chance that, because the way CrossQ is putting forth the standard, that Jamaica may not adopt the standard. So we may have Jamaican companies having to export to other CARICOM countries and add a new label to their arsenal of labels. Or if Jamaica were to adopt such a standard, which would have only one Black Octagon as a model, then countries exporting to Jamaica, in theory, would have to comply with this standard. However, their large economic impact may compel them to ask for exemptions, which would create all sorts of confusion, and or there's a lot of food imports that are very difficult to stop. So the enforcement component of the Octagon model would be nearly impossible to implement, and would impose a significantly unfair or difficult economic challenge for local manufacturers to sustain. So for us, that's one of the main reasons why we support multiple elements, and within that we certainly favor the US facts up front, as you see on the Betty Crocker buttermilk pancake here. The data is there. It's fairly easy, I believe, for a Jamaican consumer to understand that they're consuming 210 calories, that there's 9 grams of total sugars in this particular buttermilk pancake package that they may or may not buy based on how they interpret that. So again, here I reiterate the context of the imports. Jamaica is by population, a much smaller country than the other countries that have adopted Black Octagon as an exclusive standard. And it's extremely challenging for us to change and influence and control and enforce a single, model. And we've engaged with the CARICOM private sector organization, which is a new organization, which in part got together because we have issues that are of a Caribbean nature, and we've engaged in a study that is intending to be broader than the studies that have been done so far, and in look into economic impact, look at social impacts and behavioral impacts of how our consumers shop and how the FOPL standard may impact them and how they will make their choices. And again, we support FOPL. Many of us are actually implementing FOPL on our packaging. We certainly see a prevalent element in Jamaica of local companies using the US FDA nutrition facts approach, which understandably has its strengths in that it's quite complete now. The container size has been adjusted so that many single serve containers are now considered as such and not as 2 servings or 3 servings. So the amount of sugar being consumed, the amount of fats and sodium being consumed in a say a single serve soft drink are very, very clear. And there is a tremendous opportunity to educate Jamaicans, and the JMEA has also offered to support public education with the US standard, because it's very simple once you understand it where to go with a combined nutrition facts and a US facts upfront approach. Jamaicans would know fairly quickly what they're consuming and how they're going about consuming the amount of sugar, whether it's 22 grams or 26 grams or certainly 88 grams as was shown in the first presentation is too much as it takes the graph above certain limits. But certainly if Jamaicans know how much sugar they're consuming, and notwithstanding the Black Octagon doesn't say how much sugar they're consuming, it's just a Black Octagon. So folks may not stop consuming and it may stop or slow their consumption, yet they won't really know how much they're consuming, and the education over time really I don't think will be as effective as it could be if we ask them to do a little bit of math, but not that much. I think that the focus on a broader based approach of healthy eating, exercise, mitigating sedentary behaviors, and considerations for eating how much processed food you're eating versus fresh vegetables and fresh fruit, and all of that is very, very important. And in keeping with all of this discussion is one of our primary messages is that we are very much in support of front of package labeling, and that there are several approaches right now, and that using 3 to 4 or accepting 3 to 4 where 1 or 2 would obviously be far more prevalent than others is a better, faster way to get to educating Jamaicans over time, as opposed to having more of a disconnected approach, which right now, where we've been working on a standard for 3 years, we're in effect are in a stalled pattern because we couldn't agree on only including 1. Had we had 3 or 4 acceptable standards, I think the cross-Q standard that was proposed with 2 or 3 additional FOPL standards would have passed, and we would be on a faster track to implement it far more, a far better, regulatory environment for labeling. Whereas now we're still with the old, I don't know how old it is, it's quite old, standard that really has, put a pause on the entire situation, and has, made it a bit contentious, where the Bureau Standards is being questioned as the procedures they followed. And I think that we've worked too long we've gone too far and worked too long together to point fingers at the process, rather than coming to an agreement on some sort of compromise, so that we can move forward and educate Jamaicans on what they're consuming. So I think that's it for me for now. Thank you very much, and I welcome the discussion that we'll have now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chalifour. We shall now move into the question and answer section. And using my privilege as moderator, I'm going to myself condense some of the questions and, begin this process. Now, let me remind you all that I am independent and I'm not taking sides, but in terms of trying to interrogate and explore some of the issues, I will ask searching questions. So it's not an indication that I'm for or against. It really is an indication that there are some questions which clearly remain unanswered. To begin, let me say that I feel that the Manufacturers and Exporters Association have been in the crosshairs of the Heart Foundation of Jamaica. And to that extent, I would empathize with that organization, but I understand that this is a necessary process which can only be built through collaboration, cooperation, and a compromise. But if I may start with you, Mr. Chalifour, I noticed that you have mentioned that you would have a preference for an ability to choose between different standards, and that may in fact have allowed the process to proceed much faster. The US standard, I think the issue which others may have with that adoption is that it continues to be informational. You will notice that what the Heart Foundation has been promoting is beyond information. It's a warning. And as a result, I think that is the point which they would like to emphasize. The other labels, say for the British standard, does not convey a warning. It conveys information. So those are raised just a level above the existing nutritional panel. How would you respond to that charge?
Well, while I appreciate that the octagon is a warning, using that model exclusively, we believe will put a huge unfair or a huge disadvantage to local manufacturers, because we believe that the imports of US foods, certainly for the near future, 3, 5, 10-year outlook, is impossible to stop. And those companies will not implement a black octagon model at this stage. So what we recommend is an evolutionary approach where at least Jamaica implements a far more detailed regulation that requires its manufacturers to calculate and measure how much is in there, and also requires them to have at least a front of panel mechanism that yes, can be the US facts up front, and I believe that, given the nature of the discussions in the standard development so far, that the octagon model will be a part of the future standard. And what we're hoping for is that it'll be a part of 2 or 3 or 4 options that will be considered and available to manufacturers. And as we evolve, perhaps in 4 or 5 years, then a black octagon or a similar warning may become mandatory, not only in Jamaica, yet perhaps also in the US. Right now we feel that most of the processed foods in Jamaica, and if you look at a standard supermarket shelf, you would see many Jamaican products, processed foods that would have a black octagon, and many of the imported foods would not. And with some education and an element of calculation, Jamaicans would be far better informed now than they were. And the issue with NCDs is not only the food we ingest, but just how much activity we do, and how available we make fresh produce, fresh vegetables, how affordable that we make them, and how as a country we implement policies and regulations that favor growing our own food and making that food available and affordable, to compensate for the processed foods that are being consumed. And I appreciate that statistically, the American consumer, their graph in terms of obesity and implications around obesity is not good, and that we don't want to emulate everything about America, yet contextually we're 3 million people, 2.83 million people. We don't have a lot of ability to influence the food chain and the consumption of foods that our Jamaicans are eating every day, and it's going to take time. And our recommendation is that we work together and evolve towards something much more aggressive towards warnings, but that we feel that starting with warnings only right now will be counterproductive, both from an enforcement element and from an economic fairness element.
Okay, thank you for that response. I'll just make a comment and then throw some of your concerns to the Bureau. The whole point of standardization is to harmonize systems across, in this case, across the region. And I would suggest that adopting multiple standards for something as important as this would go against the objective of advancing the consumer's best interest. I mean, that is a point which can be argued, but the standards agencies and the harmonization of standards has been an important element of moving our civilization forward, throughout the years. So, just a point of thought. And if I may at this point ask the Bureau's representative first to provide some clarity and then to answer some specific questions. The first, Ms. O'Connor, are you still there? Wonderful. So Mr. Chalifour has raised a number of concerns from the stakeholder group. My first question to you and for our edification is why mandatory standards for this particular FOPL? What's the difference between mandatory and voluntary standards? And why mandatory standards at this time?
Okay, thank you so much for that question, Dr. Thompson. I will answer in Two parts. Okay, so regarding mandatory versus voluntary standards, I just want to make a point here that in the international sphere, there is no such thing as a mandatory standard. Standards by nature are voluntary. But what has happened is that our Standards Act in Jamaica and in the region makes reference to compulsory standards, which we'll be moving away from in the very short order, and we'll be promulgating technical regulations, which would be a mandatory requirement. So I just wanted to give that clarity. Now, in today's context, we still have mandatory standards on the books, even though in the short order, we'll be moving away from that. Now, the CRS-5 standard specification currently is being enforced on a mandatory basis. And the reason being is that it's the only food standard that currently makes provisions for the labeling of prepackaged foods. Now, in light of that, as you would realize, the CRS denotes a CARICOM standard. And so based on the fact that the region together had highlighted that there is a common problem regarding the high incidences of NCDs, and because the CRS-5 is used by every single CARICOM member state, it was seen as the most suitable tool to be used as a common approach in the region to address the incidence of NCDs, herein including the front of package labeling component. Now, CRS-5, as I made mention, is currently compulsory in Jamaica. However, in its revision, the front of package labeling component was included in the informative annex. And so to be a little bit technical and to explain here, the informative annex of a standard is not, the information is only there for information purposes. There are two types of annexes. There is a normative annex and then an informative annex. The normative annex is that the information that's contained therein you have to. However, in an informative annex, it was decided that as a means of compromising amongst the different CARICOM member states, the FOPL was included as an informative annex. And so currently, it is not a mandatory requirement. I also want to elaborate to explain that CARICOM standards by nature are voluntary. When CROSS-2 promulgates a CARICOM standard, member states are not bound to adopt them. The recommendation is made for it to be adopted and used. And so even at the end of the day, the CRS-5 is published and the FOPL is in it, for example, the high in octagon, that doesn't, CROSS-2 cannot dictate to Jamaica or Barbados or any CARICOM member state that they have to use the CRS-5 and they have to use the FOPL component in it. So I just wanted to respond to provide that kind of clarity.
Okay, well, thank you for that. One of the other issues raised by Mr. Chalifour is that they would be at a disadvantage relative to the products entering the trade in Jamaica. I think it's fair to say that from several accounts, goods are present in our local market, which have evaded our local standards, yet still they're still seen on the shelf. I suspect you will tell me that this is a matter for the NCRA. And at the same time, I, knowing a little history, would ask you, however, how can the Bureau currently enforce the adoption of a standard on imported products, which are not bound by the local standard, not because they don't apply, but because we cannot enforce. So the question is, how do you enforce this standard, and wouldn't this put the local manufacturers at a distinct disadvantage?
Okay, so you did touch on a point that I explained a little bit, that the enforcement of the standard, as you rightfully said, it's a matter for the National Compliance and Regulatory Authority, the NCRA. But what I can say is that the CRS-5 specification, whether it includes the front of package labeling element or not, the requirement is both the domestic products and the imported goods should be treated alike. And the requirements that exist for both the national products should exist for the imported ones. As to the monitoring mechanism and the availability of human resources to properly enforce the standard, my colleague from the NCRA would have to speak to that. I'm unable to speak to that part of it.
Well, we should probably have invited NCRA with some foresight. One of our attendees on YouTube has asked a question. Craig, is this Peru? Anyway, Craig has asked, why are restaurants allowed an unfair advantage over manufacturers? Why are restaurants not being considered in this mix of enforcement or, coming under the control of, if not this standard, a similar standard? Don't you think that is an unfair position?
I can answer that question based on my knowledge, being an employee of the BSG. I'm not seeing any colleague here from the Ministry of Health, but I do know that there has been some discussion amongst the Ministry of Health personnel in terms of implementing some standards for the restaurants to include information for nutrient content. So I do know that there are some discussions. I don't know how soon the implementation of that and the enforcement will be coming on stream, but there are some discussions there on the part of the Ministry of Health regarding making mandatory food labeling for the restaurants specific to the nutrient content of the foods that they offer.
And I suppose in time, we'll also learn whether those labeling requirements will be informational or warning, I suppose. Okay. All right. And, I think we must commend the Heart Foundation of Jamaica for, bringing this matter to our attention. I mean, the front of mind impact of all their public relations ads and the repetitiveness of it certainly has allowed us to be acutely aware that these issues in our population are real. So if I may now throw to the Heart Foundation, and I'm not sure whether it would be Ms. Nurse or Mrs. McGaw with this one. Has the Heart Foundation considered the impact of that same question, the foods from quick serve restaurants on the health of our population, Ncds?
Okay, similar to what Mr. O'Connor shared, I know the Ministry of Health has that plan, and they have been in dialogue with some of the restaurants. I guess the more branded one, not the little man on the corner and the food shops. But there has been some communication on that level, and I know that it is being reviewed within the ministry. We haven't looked into that yet, because we're just, it was a process. In other words, we're just looking at options to give people choices. I also wanted to mention that this whole labeling procedure will take some time, but the fact is that labeling standards will be applied equally to imported and locally manufactured products that exceed the thresholds in the standard and are considered to be contributing to diet-related chronic disease. Also, this is a process. Whatever country may adopt the octagon or it will take time. But the fact is that eventually there will be some sort of regulation across between imported and local food.
Okay, I find it interesting that we're attempting to, we will be attempting to regulate the labeling on, let's say, a large corporation in the US, where the Jamaican sales represent a fraction of 1%. of their production. But at the same time, the local manufacturers will have to contend with the issues raised by implementing the standard on the one hand, and on the other hand, will have to incur additional costs, etc. Now, back to the HFJ, one of the concerns that I had relative to the various surveys that had been done is this. Did those surveys include in-home trials to assess the diet of, let us say, a typical family unit over an extended period of time, as opposed to, just looking at their basket of goods within, let us say, their supermarket run? Let me rephrase that. The pattern, especially now during this pandemic, is that we're consuming foods. The foods that we consume really is a mixture of a number of things. Foods from the supermarket, foods from restaurants, quick serve restaurants, or the mom and pop shop on the corner, the drum pan chicken, and foods prepared within the home using ingredients for which I'm not sure that the current FOPL system will be targeting things like sugar, bulk oil, bulk flour, bulk salt. In other words, did the survey look at the complete meal composition relative to the different components and preparation styles and preferences when the compilation had been done?
Okay, just for clarity, which study were you talking about? The post-campaign evaluations about people's attitudes towards labeling?
No, from the presentation, I understood that a survey had been done of the diets of individuals. Am I wrong?
I think you're speaking about the study that was done in Jamaica to identify which warning label would have been the most effective. I think you're referring to that one, as well as the other studies that we refer to being done in Canada and Brazil, etc. The issue of the preparation of foods and what we would call a dietary assessment, for example, what a person eats for an entire day. These studies would not have covered that because they're looking specifically at prepackaged foods and looking at the labeling, comparing different types of front of package models to each other. So it wouldn't have taken into consideration consumption patterns and, caloric intake of a person, or how much salt, fat, or sugar a person would consume on a normal day. It was just, they were randomized controlled studies, experimental studies. The one in Jamaica was a randomized controlled study done specifically to compare the different models of front of package warning label. So we acknowledge that it is a complex issue, and we were really trying to identify what model would allow for a better choice. So what model would allow the consumers to identify prepackaged foods that were less harmful or more harmful, which was the intention. But we do acknowledge that the drivers of obesity are complex, but these studies were looking at a specific objective as it relates to prepackaged food and comparing different models to each other.
Okay, I think I have a better understanding. In other words, two things. One, you had done a survey on attitudes, which is essentially a paper survey. Is that correct?
Not necessarily attitudes, but more to predict behavior. So if, for example, in the randomized control study, persons were assigned to particular front of package labels, and they were shown products with these labels, and they were asked to identify which product is more harmful, less harmful, which product would you buy. And the products that had the front of package, the black octagonal warning labels, consumers were more likely to identify the more harmful products, or, you know, so that was the intention of the study, to determine which model would be able to provide consumers with an opportunity to make a better choice.
Okay, so having said that, the other point is you're, and I don't want to use the word targeting, but you are focusing on prepackaged goods within that study.
Yes, yes. The standard
Okay.
is actually for prepackaged.
For prepackaged goods. No, I understand. And because I would think that the interest of the wider population goes beyond prepackaged goods. It goes to look at the composition and the profile of their entire meal in any one day and over a period of time. And as a result, unless you can know, say with certainty that prepackaged goods represent a fixed percentage, and I think you know, it may be 20%, 30%, 50%, 80 or 90%. But my point is that until you can quantify that contribution of prepackaged goods to the overall diet of our Jamaican population, on average, and across different demographics, etc. Do you think it's misleading to say that prepackaged goods as a category of food is the most significant contributor to NCDs?
That's a difficult one.
I know, I know it is a difficult one.
There have been studies in other parts of the world, but of course we would have to relate it to Jamaica. So
because of our cultural
church-oriented organization, maybe there are some, you know, there may be some students or some persons doing that exact research now, or maybe at another university, because it is important. I couldn't hazard a guess as to the percentage, but you saw in Mr. Chalifour's presentation the amount of food that we import, you know? So to actually break it down as a percentage, I suspect it will be a range depending on where you are and what you can afford. So I think you're right. I think it's food for thought. And it's possible that there is some sort of research like that could be undertaken or may already be started to be undertaken. But I couldn't comment any further, you know, on that.
Okay, and as I said, I'm not taking sides here. I'm really trying to explore the basis on which, you know, some of this information is being disseminated. Do you think, in the absence of that complete type of study, do you think the manufacturers would feel hard done by the promotional material which is in the public sphere?
Well, I think you'd have to ask the manufacturers. I really couldn't comment on that, meaning that one of the things, as you mentioned in my bio, that we worked in tobacco, there's clearly no safe level of tobacco. And so that started off the whole conversation around, the use of tobacco. But with food, there are levels and there's also portion control. So even if the products are high in whatever, it's how much you take, It would have to be the industry that would answer if they feel hard done by. I wouldn't be able to say that. But again, most of the stuff and most of our campaign is related to evidence-based and local research too. We don't just use what has been in other jurisdictions.
Okay, understood. Mr. Chalifour, do you have a response?
Well, I mean, I find Mrs. McGaw's last comment a little confusing, where on the first point you were asking about the overall consumption of Jamaicans, sort of the entire plate of food that they eat over a period of time, and then the evidence-based analysis that has been done should lend itself to answering your first question. If we know what Jamaicans' consumption pattern is, then we should have an idea of what they're eating, when they're eating, and total caloric intake. I think what we want to do as a country is work together and graph it out so that whether it's obesity we're measuring or whether it's total sugars being consumed, say, I remember one of the graphs in the first presentation showing 88 grams. I don't know if that was for Jamaica or for the US, but you certainly, you want to do some collaborative studies that follow the same metrics over a period of time and ensure that these metrics are seeing the curve go down or positively towards the better data or the better metric around predictors of NCDs. Because at the end of the game, the private sector does not gain from an unhealthy Jamaican. We want healthy Jamaicans. We want to work together to making Jamaicans healthy, because the private sector will invest its capital towards the products that will sell, and therefore, I mean, I think one of the elements that is working against us or has worked against us over time is affordability. Much of the American and other foods that are coming into Jamaica are affordable. Many of us manufacturers in Jamaica are making affordable foods, which often are, made on highly mechanized, highly productive equipment. So the cost per unit is low. We're looking at a situation where perhaps these foods are not the best foods. And what we're suggesting in our response to the whole standard development on FOPL, which is the topic today, is that we want to work with everyone, and we want an FOPL, and we want far better labeling regulations, because right now what we have is extremely weak. And by however imperfect the inclusion of 2, 3, 4 different models may be, it's tremendous progress towards the end goal. And if we work together on monitoring this graph over time, and if we asked the Ministry of Health if we could participate in the study, if we could look at the study preparation together, and all of that was a black hole. So I think one of the things that we're asking for is I'd like to join this meeting next year and say that we work with the Heart Foundation and Ministry of Health on developing a standard methodology of study that we will follow. And maybe we can do the studies. It doesn't matter who does it, but that we will follow over time so that we can work together to improve the health of our Jamaicans and reduce the incidence of NCDs. Right now we're at a stalemate. We don't have a standard because we couldn't agree. And it wasn't just the private sector that didn't agree, it was different entities. And one of the entities that did not agree was a National Compliance Agency. or was not in support, and you know, I know Ms. O'Connor couldn't speak on their behalf, but and neither can I, but I can infer from the fact that I know Wendell over there, and he has expressed in meetings that it's extremely challenging already to monitor and enforce current regulations. That this particular one, you know, if it was a standalone black octagon that would not be, you know, used in the U.S., it would be extremely difficult to comply with. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but I think I digressed into something else.
Okay, well, you know, we understand that this is an issue which requires collaboration, cooperation, patience, and, you know, understanding of each of the parties concerned. At the center of the discussion and the outcome has to be an improvement in the health status of our Jamaican population. That is the end game. And certainly, you know, we have the persons in this discussion who can and who will influence that outcome. We're running a bit on time. I think I'll ask 2 more questions, some condensed, distilled from what has been being asked online, as well as, you know, ending where we began. Sorry. Now, Ms. O'Connor, if I may pose another question to you. In 2019, between May and November 2019, and this information is on the Bureau's website, Ms. O'Connor has been the voice and face of the Bureau in this campaign, and she has done a tremendous job. But I'm referring now to the headline of one of the articles published on the Bureau's website. It reads, "No need for alarm as the regional standard is being revised." As well, the government is moving to make front of package labeling mandatory. So, Ms. O'Connor, my question to you is, do you still believe, as the representative from the Bureau, that there is no need for alarm?
Yes, I do. Thanks for that question. Are you hearing me clearly?
Yes, we are. Yes, I am.
Yes, I do believe there is no need for alarm, and my response is based on the premise that I believe that the process at the BSJ, since we started in 2018, has been very transparent, and we have been in constant dialogue with the pertinent stakeholders. So persons are aware, those who will be affected by the standard, they are fully aware of as to what is happening with it, the progress that we're making, and also the fact that the basis of this discussion, it came, as I made mention earlier, from a high-level meeting that was held in 2017 amongst the CARICOM officials. So to respond to your question, yes, I still believe that there's no need for alarm, because persons who are a part of the process or will be affected by the standard are a part of the discussions, are at the table, and the requisite ministers, particularly the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Trade, they are actively involved in the discussions. Yes. Okay,
and I think there's a very interesting op-ed piece from the current Minister of Industry and Commerce, the Honorable Audley Shaw, you know, which laid out what appeared to be a very sound position. And, you know, it speaks to the fact that, you know, due consideration at that level is being given to all of the stakeholders. At this point, I'd like to ask Dr. Peart, who started the ball rolling, a question. Dr. Peart, having heard all of the discussion up to this point, do you believe that we're on a road to improving the food supply to the benefit of your children? Are you there, Dr. Pearce?
I'm not hearing you so clearly. Hello?
Yes, can you
Hello?
hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, could you repeat the question, please?
Right. I'm asking, and after this, unless there are some questions which the presenters would like to ask each other, this would be my last question. But having heard the discussion over the last 2 hours, are you satisfied that we are doing enough and we have...
Hello? The connection is a bit
position?
wonky, so I'm missing pieces of the question.
Do you have any confidence that the food supply for your children will improve in time for them to live a long and healthy life? Did I lose you? Dr. Pearce, are you there? I think she is having some severe connection issues. Okay, at this point, I think we're nearly out of time for this forum. Is there any question which any of the panelists would like to ask their other panelists for clarity or for the purpose of elucidating specific points? I take it the answer is no. All right. I think we have, certainly explored this topic. We could explore it further.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes. Are you hearing me?
Oh, so yes, I can hear you. Whether or not the food supply will improve in terms of
in time
the nutritional
for your
labeling so that
children.
my kids...
Yes.
I'm less concerned about my children because I have more awareness about food and how it impacts your health. So, we're raising them in such
Children
a way
in general,
that,
right.
to make healthy choices. So my greater concern is with the wider population, and that we might not be moving fast enough to ensure and safeguard their future. Because really it starts here. We are seeing where more and more children are obese. If you look at what they're consuming too, it's low nutrient food. So along with issues of obesity, we have to look at malnutrition, not getting enough vitamin A, not getting enough iron or calcium. So those things go hand in hand. I would really love to see a push towards, developing foods or moving towards foods that focus on nutrition, on improving the nutrient delivery and away from the salts and sugars. I understand the basis for using these things, but we are presented with the opportunity to really do better, to innovate and to lead the way.
Okay, thank you for that. And that will be the last question from me. Certainly, at this point, I'd like to thank all our panelists. You've done a tremendous job in representing your institution. But I think we have a long way to go. As Dr. Pearce just mentioned, we need to act much faster if we are to have any meaningful impact on the health outcomes of this and succeeding generations. How can we achieve this? Can we work more collaboratively, more cooperatively? Can we decide on certainly strategies which will get us there? Are there strategies which we can use in parallel as opposed to in sequence? And I think certainly at some point, so as to address this issue in a fulsome manner, it would be appropriate to do a series of studies from in-home trials, which look at the consumption pattern and the diets of several families from different demographics, both urban and rural, both low income, middle, and higher income, to try and develop a profile of the consumption. This is not to take anything away from the work which had already been done by the Heart Foundation, and we continue to applaud their efforts. But as Mrs. McGraw mentioned, it is a complex issue and there are no quick fixes. The front of package labeling, whether we adopt it in the octagonal model from Chile, the US model, or the European or the British model, it is not a silver bullet. If we implemented it tomorrow, chances are the problem will still exist, hopefully not at the same level, but to what degree, we cannot say at this point. So with that, I'd like to close this stimulating discussion and thank our panelists, starting with Dr. Pearce, Patrice Pearce. Thank you. We appreciate the time and effort in your presentation. It certainly reinforced a number of the issues that we knew existed. And to the stellar work of Ms. O'Connor, who continues to work tirelessly at the Bureau on progressing the adoption of standards which help and are to the benefit of our population on a whole. To the team from the Heart Foundation of Jamaica, both Mrs. McGaw and Ms. Nurse, we must take our hats off to you, your work, and the impact of the ads and the persistence that you've had over these few years is paying off. Do not lose hope. I think, with efforts as yours, we will eventually meet the ultimate goal. And of course, to Mr. Chalifour, we recognize that it appears that all of these efforts have been targeted at prepackaged goods. We also recognize that the competition from external imports or imports from external manufacturers has to be of concern to your sector. And as a result, efforts to level the playing field to the extent that that is possible should continue to be made so that you too can survive within this environment. And with that, I'd also like to thank the organizers of this forum, the staff at the Faculty of Science and Technology, in particular, Mrs. Terry Ann Collins-Free, who has worked tirelessly to make this the success that it is. And of course, her supporting team and in the personage of Dr. Marvadine Singh Wilmot and Dr. Andre Coy. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time and do have a good and safe evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, everyone, and good night.
Thank
Okay,
you.
right. Good night.
Okay.